Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda and I'm the Enchantress of Avalon. So for today's Monday video, I decided I am going to be discussing portals to fairy. And specifically, I'm going to focus on fairy rings and hollow hills, but I'm going to talk a little bit about different portals outside of those too. I did mention different portals into fairyland in my dangerous side of fairy video, but I wanted to do an entire video just really focusing on different ways to enter fairylands. I think it's going to be fun. So I'm going to start with the fairy rings. They are the most well-known way to enter fairy, and it's the one that most people think of when they think of getting to a fairyland. So fairy rings appear as these perfect circles in nature. They are often a circle of mushrooms that have grown in this perfect circle. They just naturally appear this way. They can also be an area of just perfectly flattened grass, which, if that sounds like some of the alien invasion theories with flattened grass and such, there can be a connection. Some people believe that alien abductions and fairy abductions really aren't that different. But I'm not going to go in deep with that theory in this video. I just wanted to mention it. And the other way they're sometimes presented is a perfect circle of stones. So it's stones lined up in this perfect symmetrical circle. And these rings are said to appear after these times of fairy revelry. Like, they'll appear in the morning after the Fae have been having some sort of a really raucous party the night before. Because when the Fae dance, they are said to do so in circular rings. They'll dance around a bonfire, they'll dance around a person, they'll dance with something in the center. They're the ones dancing, and they're dancing in that circle. And that is why it's said if you find these rings, that's probably an area where the Fae were dancing the night before. But if you enter a fairy ring, that's how you can enter fairyland, whether on purpose or an accident. A lot of people have entered fairy on accident, or even come upon these revelries when they're taking place at night and joined in the party, only to find when they did leave the fairy ring that a lot of time had passed. They thought they were partying away only for one night, but maybe a century had passed in the human land. Everyone they know is gone. And this can also almost be said to be similar to the fairy tale of Rip Van Winkle, where he falls asleep and 100 years have passed. In some tellings, it's only 20, but it's usually 100. And it's that whole energy of you're disappearing into this alternate world. And when you come back, time has passed. You can also, if you pass into a fairy ring, get lost in one of the fairy realms forever. So that's why there's often said to be a lot of danger associated with fairy rings. So let's go on to speaking about the Hollow Hills. The Hollow Hills are literally different hills or knocks in Ireland. I'm sure they exist other places, but our most famous stories of Hollow Hills and getting to fairy through a fairy portal in a hollow hill are from Irish Celtic lore. And basically, these hills, again called knocks, are associated with certain divinities, fairy divinities. The Irish Tuatha De Danann, or the people of the goddess Danu, the children of the goddess Danu. They're also sometimes called the people of the people of the Fairy Hills, Fairy Mounds, and they were ancient deities in Ireland who ruled the land before humans came to settle there. And when humans came to settle there after a war, they retreated into the hills. And that's where the Irish otherworld began. They developed their own fairyland where they became the gods of these people and worshipped by these people, but they did not live amongst them, except in instances where they did take a human form and possibly married and had children with human men. Especially the women were known to do this. But it's said to go into these hills would be to go to Faerylands. Now, are the hills actually hollow? Some of them have caves, and technically, yes, but not all of them. The whole idea is that they are energetically hollow and become portals to fairy, and that if you go too close to them, you could become drawn into fairy and possibly trapped there. And again, it relates to the concept of changelings that I discussed in my Dangerous Fairies video. I could honestly do an entire video just on changelings. It's a very, very rich topic, but that's not what this video is about today. We're just talking about actually accessing fairy realms. And these are folkloric ways of accessing fairy realms. In the case of the Bridget Cleary, totally different circumstance. Bridget Bishop was the first woman to be hung in Salem as a witch. Bridget Cleary was the last woman to be burned to death in Ireland, and she was the fairy bride. I did again mention her in that previous Dangerous Fairies video, and I have a blog post about the burning of Bridget Cleary on my blog, whiteroseofAvalon.life. I will link in the description box below. But she was said to have been switched out with a changeling by going a little too close to one of these fairy-infested areas, the areas that belong to the Fae. Now that I've talked a little bit about those two major portals into fairy, let's look at some of the other portals to fairy. Any place of liminality can be a portal to Faerylands. So liminality is between places and even between times. It's said you are more likely to enter a portal of fairy in between times. Times like dusk, dawn, because of sunrise and sunset. It's not really day and not really night. Midnight, because it's not really one day and not really the next. And liminal times of year, which would be all of those holidays on the wheel of the year, but most especially the 4 cross-quarter days of Samhain, Beltane, Imbolc, which is coming up, by the way. It is usually celebrated on February 1st. And Lughnasadh, which is in August. Because of this liminal time frame, the Fae are more active, and it's more likely that you could enter their realms, should you wish to. Or if you don't wish to, you could enter them accidentally. And then, when we're thinking of liminality and entering fairy through a liminal place, or a liminal time, both, obvious liminal places are places of water. And we see this a lot in Welsh Celtic lore with lake maidens, the Garuth Anun, literally translated to the wives of the underworld or otherworld. They are the Welsh lake maidens, and their portals to fairy are underneath lakes. And all through Celtic culture, we have this whole idea of water, because water is a liminal element. You can enter fairy through watery places. If you dive down deep enough into that lake, you might end up coming out on the other end in a fairyland. And this is also, the Gruthanoon is most likely where we get the Arthurian Lady of the Lake. And therefore, it also relates her to Morgan Le Fay, who we all know is my favorite goddess of all time. And then other liminal spaces that are associated with waters would be sacred wells. And this is why we often hear stories of fairy women protecting sacred wells. These sacred wells are portals to fairy because they are liminal spaces. They are those watery plains that could make someone end up on the other side in the other world of fae. And then we also have, as I discussed in my magic mirror video last Monday, mirrors could be portals to fairy. And anytime you see a 7-pointed fairy star, that star itself, it can be said to be a portal to fairy. It is also called a septagram and several other different names, but we most often refer to it on this channel as the fairy or elven star, and it is thought that this star alone is enough to transport someone to Faerylands. So I do hope you've enjoyed this video discussing different portals to fairy. If you have liked it, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life. And again, I will link a bunch of different blog posts relating to fairy portals and different fairy cases in the description box below. And I did rather recently put a donations page on my blog for those who are so inclined to leave small one-time donations to help support my ability to continue creating content like this. So I want to thank you all for watching and say have a very blessed Monday. Bye now.